Hello, my name is Dr. Jeremy Stovall and I'm the Assistant Director of Bands at Jacksonville State University. Today, I will be talking about the life and music of James Reese Europe. James Reese Europe was an accomplished conductor, band leader, and composer during the early 20th century. He was an influential figure in the transition from ragtime to early jazz, and was also a champion of African American musicians and composers. After his untimely death, Europe's fame unfortunately turned to obscurity. He achieved much in his short life and was a significant influence on American music at an important time in our nation's history. James Reese Europe was born on February 22, 1880 in Mobile, Alabama. His father Henry was a self-taught musician. He took more of an improvisational approach to music. His mother Lorraine could read music and taught her children their first music lessons on piano. The Europe family moved to Washington, D.C. in 1889 when Henry took a job at the post office. James and his sister Mary received music instruction from the assistant director of the United States Marine Band in Washington, D.C. This early influence of military music would prove to be beneficial later in James's life. After the sudden death of his father, James moved to New York City to pursue a music career. At that time, the most exciting area of the black music profession was musical theater. James found regular employment playing in orchestra pits for these productions. In the fall of 1904, James was asked last minute to direct the orchestra and chorus for a musical comedy called A Trip to Africa. This began his career as one of the leading figures in black musical theater, which would occupy him for the next 6 years, both conducting and composing for these shows. Prior to 1910, African Americans were excluded from the local musician unions. So, in 1910, Europe helped organize the Clef Club. This was a society for African Americans in the music industry in New York City. This union created a central gathering place for musicians looking for job opportunities. For entertainment in the club, Europe created the first all-African American orchestra in the country. This was called the Clef Club Orchestra. This is a picture of the Clef Club Orchestra. It consisted of around 125 musicians. And outside of the standard orchestral string and wind instruments that we think of with orchestras, the Clef Club Orchestra also included several unique instruments to orchestra. If we look in the front row of the picture here, you see banjos, mandolins, guitars, and ukuleles. The group also included about 12 upright pianos as well, so this created a very unique sound for orchestra. In 1912, the Clef Club Orchestra made history when they played a concert at Carnegie Hall in New York City. This concert was a benefit concert for a music school for African American children in New York City. The program featured songs, marches, and choral works, all written by black composers and performed by black musicians. The concert was a tremendous success. It sold out, and hundreds of people stood in the aisles and in the back of the hall. This concert also elevated James Reese Europe's reputation as a conductor and composer. The Carnegie Hall concert was a significant event in demonstrating the power of music and breaking down racial barriers that plagued our country. This also led for more employment opportunities for members of the Clef Club. During the spring and summer of 1913, the popularity of social dancing began to grow. Europe and his Clef Club were asked to provide a large number of dance orchestras for entertainment purposes. A select group that Europe led himself, called the Society Orchestra, became nationally famous, accompanying theater headliners Vernon and Irene Castle. The Castles were a husband and wife team of ballroom dancers and dance teachers that appeared on Broadway and in silent movies. They were two of the biggest entertainers of their time. As a result of his association with the Castles, James Reese Europe and his orchestra made a series of recordings of dance music for Victor Records. It was one of the first contracts ever given by a major record company to a black musician, and it was the first ever given to a black orchestra. After the outbreak of World War I, James Reese Europe enlisted in the 15th Infantry Regiment of the New York National Guard. This newly formed unit was an all-African American unit based in Harlem. He did not join as a musician originally and was assigned to a machine gun company. He believed that this National Guard unit in Harlem would be a benefit for the African American community. As soon as the National Guard leaders found out that James was, in fact, the most famous orchestra leader in the city at the time, they appointed him lieutenant and leader of the 15th Regimental Band. On New Year's Day in 1918, James Reese Europe and the 1st African American Combat Units landed in France. The band, which was later renamed the 369th Regiment Band, would soon become one of the most famous military bands throughout Europe. They traveled throughout France, entertaining soldiers and the French citizens, and also helped to introduce ragtime and early jazz to the country. In addition to his band duties, Lieutenant Europe took command of his own combat unit, Company 1 of the 3rd Battalion. In this role, he became the first African American officer to lead troops into combat in World War I. And he was also very likely the first African American to cross into no man's land and participate in a raid behind German lines. The nickname Hellfighters was given to the regiment by the Germans because of their toughness and tenacity in battle. The 369th Infantry Regiment, also known as the Harlem Hellfighters, served for nearly 6 months on the front lines and earned many distinguished awards. James also wrote some of his most popular songs during World War I. Songs like On Patrol in No Man's Land and All of No Man's Land is Ours gave listeners a first-hand account of life on the front lines. At the end of the war, the 369th Infantry Regiment returned to New York and were greeted with a victory parade in their honor on February 17, 1919. Here in this picture, we see the 369th Infantry Regiment Band. And if you look to the lower right-hand corner, you will see James Reese Europe on the very end of the front row. Over 1 million New Yorkers turned out to witness the homecoming of these American troops from the battlefields of Europe. The parade ran from Fifth Avenue to Harlem. And here we see another slide with pictures of both the crowd and the different units marching in the parade. A few days after the parade, Europe announced that the Hellfighters Band had scheduled a 10-week tour of the United States. At the beginning of the tour, the band recorded 28 songs. This was a historic event in jazz history. These recordings, which can be heard today, feature landmark jazz tunes as well as some of James Reese Europe's most famous compositions. After the final concert of the tour, on May 9, 1919, after an altercation, Europe was attacked and stabbed by one of his drummers, Herbert Wright. He died later that night in the hospital. He was only 39 years old. The country had lost one of its great composers and the most popular African American band leader in the United States. James Reese Europe was granted the first ever public funeral for an African American in New York City, and he was also buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. It's easy to speculate on the potential contributions James Reese Europe might have made if he had lived longer. At the time of his death, he was one of the best-known band leaders and composers in the United States. He had already accomplished a great deal in popularizing ragtime and the beginnings of early jazz. It's easy to think that he could have been one of the most influential figures in American music ever. Some believe that his fame would have risen to the same level as that of Scott Joplin or Louis Armstrong or Duke Ellington. The popularity of jazz that followed his death might have never happened if it weren't for James Reese Europe laying the foundation. But, unfortunately, after his death, his fame faded to obscurity. The story of James Reese Europe is one for the history books, but yet that story is often difficult to find in one. His impact on American music is grossly underrepresented in our music history education. It is my hope that all who encounter his story will realize his significance and be compelled to tell his story as I am. I hope you have enjoyed this talk on one of America's forgotten heroes. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. In the meantime, let's listen to James Reese Europe's band performing the Memphis Blues.